Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Marshal D Teach discussions coming at you today with an OP 10 ban list. This will be the March ban list that they announced that they're going to do. Obviously, it affects a lot of people, but hopefully we'll get some nice bans. In this video, we're going to talk about cards that I think should be banned, cards that are going to be kind of like honorable mentions, and some like kind of dramatic cards that I think that people are talking about needing to get hit, and then some possible unbans. So like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned. We're going to have to first address the big elephant in the room, Big Dofi. And these are all the reasons that I can come up with to ban the deck. It's hyper consistent such overtune, extreme board spam, removal along way, broken support cards, deck representation, and the deck does not need to adapt. In terms of hyper consistent and being overtuned, just look at these 7 cards right here. You have a 2K that will top 3 search to aid in the leader effect. Now they have to stay at the top, so if it's bad, like that's the only downside to the card. But it being a 2K and a stacker is most of the time pretty consistently good given the amount of 4 costs that you play. Additionally, Sengoku is a top 5 searcher to add basically everything on the screen that's not Perona and then some. This is one of the huge offenders in consistency. This is a searcher for Jinbei so that you have it, and any other pieces like Law that you're going to need in your matchup. You have Perona to top 5 search on, so not searcher, it's a stacker on top and bottom. So if it's bad, you just put it at the bottom, and if it's really good, you keep it at the top. Marshal D Teach, one of the grossest cards that I think that they printed for a deck archetype. I have no idea why they made this card, but it's probably ban worthy in its own right if somehow they don't come to the conclusion that this leader needs to be banned. But its effect is literally enabling the leader. It turns your hand into whatever the top of the deck is. Boa, 4/6 blocker that top 3 searches and gives Dawn to the leader. Weevil is going to draw a card, and Law can bounce any of these 1-drops and or anything else essentially to either return himself to the hand to increase your consistency and remove a card off your opponent's board. No deck has this much help, and one of these cards is removal. It's just like the bottom line. There isn't much to say. I mean, Law bouncing Sengoku and how many times you can replace Sengoku is just in a match is just completely egregious. Perona with the consistency aspect of this, returning Law back to your hand so you could continuously loop the card and bouncing your opponent's 4 or less is just really obnoxious as well. Board spam. Now Jinbei is like the primary offender of the board spam. He's basically like a mini Gecko in this deck on steroids, but Teach is what truly breaks Jinbei, and I'll explain why. On the odd curve at 5 Dawn, you can play Jinbei, then play a 4 cost, then use Teach effect to attach to Dawn by putting the Jinbei on from your hand on top of the deck, and then swing 7 and then play the Jinbei to play another card from your hand. Okay, that is 16 Dawn worth of value at 5 Dawn. Now your hand's pretty drained unless the 2 cards they play are Weevils, right? They both draw, or are some kind of like recycle effect where you're going to like Law bounce a Jinbei back to your hand, or Law bounce like the Perona or Sengoku back to your hand. It's just a huge, like, even though it's niche, it's a possibility. Now what's very likely is a 4 cost and 1 Jinbei, which at 5 Dawn you can play 12 worth of Dawn of cards and at the same time still swing 7. And if the card that's stacked at the top, let's say you play Jinbei into Boa, you do your top 3, you then have a Weevil in your hand, and then you stack, you play a Weevil, you have 4/6 blocker, you have a Jinbei, and you have Weevil, and you drew a card that you got to look off of Boa, and you swung for 8 now. So Teach just breaks this, and I think that the Teach is the most egregious offender of the board spam. Removal. So this is even all it can run, and it's the best deck. And Jozu isn't that bad, admittingly, which is why he's like down here and a little bit smaller, but these 2 cards are insane. This is all it needs to run. It doesn't need Red Rock, although it can play it. And all the other blue cards that I'm going to skip over, but you can just go look them up for yourself, of all the cards that like bounce or, you know, bottom deck. But these 2 cards are all that's needed. And it's all that they basically needed for 3 4-bats, and we'll be going on 4 4-bats in a row. So the Law is just probably at the top of the most wanted list of cards to be banned if you don't ban the leader, because for some reason people think that this deck isn't like Sakazuki or Law or Whitebeard, and this is going to be the 3rd or 4th format where this leader will be a tier 1 top contending, arguably best deck. And people are still trying to justify that instead of banning the leader, we need to ban the support cards around it. Admittedly, some of them are, and this one is probably at the top of the list, like I said. And that's simply because this card invalidates cards that would actually destroy Dofi, right? It invalidates Green's Pedro. It invalidates Borsalino for black. It invalidates Lucky Roo for Shanks. And without him, all of the decks just would extremely get better against Dofi, because you would have literally mid removal or consistent block. They're all still weak to cards like Grab Blade, but this law is what is generating. I mean, like bouncing Son Goku back to hand to return the 4 cost and then watch them search again is just awful. I mean, it just feels awful. Like they're gaining a card and you just basically forfeited a 4-Dawn play on your end. And then Gravity Blade, Raging Tiger. This is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to say it anyway outright. This is the most bannable event in the game right now. This is more bannable to me than Gum Gum Giant, which people are up in a tizzy about for no reason whatsoever. But the problem with Gravity Blade is that at 7 Dawn, outside of Reiju, there isn't a deck that I'm aware of that can play a card higher than the cost of this card's ability to bottom deck on 7 curve properly. So the 7 cost EGG can come down and be protected by its cost from this. Cost increase effects can help with this, but majority of the time, this card's bottom decking 2 cards. It also is part of the reason why BY doesn't just walk all over Dofi, and BY is like not the best deck in the game. That and Pudding. But this card is way too powerful for what it does. Bottom decking 2/6 or less, it's the best form of removal and has a trigger to bottom deck of 5. This card should also probably just be outright banned, even if they ban the Dofi leader. Broken support tools. Each one of these cards is bannable in their own right. They are simple but extremely effective for Dofi's game plan, are far too powerful for what the deck does. I'm going to start with Femur because it's the least egregious, and we've already talked a little bit about Gravelade, but Femur should not exist in a deck where you can literally vomit 16 cards worth of value on your 3rd turn, because the amount of Dawn Divvying Onslaught to hit you to 0 and just shoot straight through any blocker you play is egregious. This also has a trigger to draw a card, so it's not immediately dead. Do you want to know the matchup that Femur is bad in? The Mirror. That's it. This card is broken in literally in every other matchup that's not the Mirror. I mean, I just don't know what to say to that. I just actually don't know what to say to that. The best use of Femur in the Mirror is to give 2,000 power to a card, then use the 2 Dawn that you played the card for to attach on top of Teach and make it a swing stronger. That's it. Gravity Blade, when you look at the fact that this deck is already mid-max removing cards off of Law while spamming multiple cards to the board, you can't keep a board. And at 8 Dawn, with Teach present on the board already, you can still play 2 bodies to the board while minusing your opponent's bodies on the board by 2. And it's got a broken trigger. An extremely ban-worthy card. Then there's this egregious offender, Pudding. I don't know what they were thinking making a card like this in the game. It should be banned. The reason this card needs to be banned is quite simple. Blue aggro decks get to beat people's faces in, and if you brick, you lose your whole hand. One Piece is becoming about consistency. It's part of the reason why Dofi's so broken, and we are getting more consistent decks that exist in the game. But Pudding invalidates all of this. She invalidates you being consistent in plussing. She invalidates you taking damage. She invalidates you playing into a strategy of high hand size. This would be like Whitebeard, for example. She invalidates your late game possibilities. There are people who will play this card to attempt to ruin your hand, even at 5 cards. Even at 5 cards. That's what makes this card such a problem. And then on top of it, with what this leader is doing, vomiting 2, 3, 4 cards, and the amount of replayability and recovery for this deck, coupled with this card and Teach, is egregious. Let me explain a scenario for you. Let's just say for a moment that you're on the 2nd curve and they're on 1st. You draw a card. So you go to 6. You play 1 card down, you go down to 5. They swing 7. You don't feel like countering 2 cards, so you take it. Now you go from 5 to 6. You have 4 Dawn play. You go down to 6 cards. If the card that you played was a searcher and replaced itself, by the way, now you're at 8 cards. You don't have a good 4 Dawn play. Sometimes this happens at Shanks. You had a card that replaced itself on your 1st turn, and then you drawing, you're now at 7, 8 cards. At 5 Dawn, if they played Teach, now they can play Pudding at 5, and then vomit a Jinbei and another card, and bottom deck your whole hand, while probably insultingly playing a Weevil to draw a card. That's how stupid this card is. And it's only the 3rd turn of the game. You went -3 if you didn't play anything to the board when you had 8 cards, or you couldn't, because sometimes your hand just gets stuck full of high cost cards and you have 1 2K and you couldn't counter out of the 7, some people will be like, well, maybe you should build your deck to brick less. But some people build their decks to like last to the end game and go tall. The Shanks is a perfect example of this, and it's a perfectly viable competitive deck. But like pudding just invalidates it completely. So I think that a unilateral hand shuffle should be banned. Like this effect should have discard 2 cards on it to even like attempt to be playable. Deck representation. This right here is a deck spread meta representation in post EBO2 in terms of tournament wins. Look at where Dofy's at. It's the second most winning deck post EBO2. It's been number 1 for the longest, and this deck hasn't been solved, nor have the counters to it been figured out yet. This right here is a top 8 of a treasure cup that occurred like last weekend in 09. This is post EBO2. This is currently an 09 treasure cup. Now there was another one where Teach won, and this representation isn't nearly as high, but I'm going to show you some examples. So when was EBO2 released? It was released January 25th. This is the treasure cup from Eggman Events. Shouts to Eggman. We're gonna start here at 16th. Dofy, Boa, Dofy, the purple Luffy, Dofy, purple Luffy, Dofy. Jonas went 10-0. We following along here? This is Jonas's list. We're gonna get to that in a second, but I want you to see this because this is EBO2, dude. This is EBO2. The deck is still a tier 1, better than Teach, better than Purple, Anel, Shanks, everybody. This is the only deck right now, post EB, that is contending to beat Dofy, okay? And that is before people solve how to beat this deck, which somebody did. I think the Japan regional, Dofy was 25%, and there was one red-green smoker that literally torched every green-purple Luffy that it ran into on its way to winning the entire event. This right here, look at this. This is a 5-0 flagship deck that is post-EB as well. Okay, so this is what the deck looks like right now for a winning deck list. I mean, no wonder the deck representation isn't going anywhere. This is just complete nonsense. Now this right here, 75% of your top 8 is a tier 0 deck. This is egregious, and it should look like this pretty much for almost every tournament, and I'm not joking. Right now in 09, that's all this should look like. There aren't very many good counters to either of these decks. Like Dofy counters him, Teach can win this matchup, but both of these in general are extremely hard for most players to beat. Blue Dofy, the deck doesn't need to change. Since getting the structured deck, the deck does not need to change at all to be viable. Company with everything else as leader is 100% ban worthy. So remember those deck lists I was showing you? This is Jonas's winning list from 09, his 10-0 list that we just looked at here for this egregious top 16 representation of sea of blue Dofys. This is a winning deck list from Japan post EB. This is like 10.5. That's what we call it. The deck literally doesn't change. Doesn't change really at all. We have all of these cards. Kaya, I've seen like a one-off tech of Kaya here and there. This guy was even being played for one of the finals in Australia. Here's just the bottom line. We shouldn't be in a format like this where having a 10.5 format in Japan, this deck is going 5-0 winning and not a single card from basically any set forward from the structure deck's release is in it. Not one. So that's my point. The deck doesn't even need to add new cards to be at the top, and just completely and utterly is egregious. So Blue Dofy, due to this, in my opinion, is completely ban worthy. If you want deck information to look at, you can, with all the things that I've showed you, you can search them yourselves. Are there alternatives? And these are my alternatives. All of these cards in Dofy need to be addressed in some way, in my opinion, if you want to make this leader fair. And it's not exactly easy to say, like, should we just ban all 5 of these and just gut Dofy? If you don't want this deck to be a continual nuisance and a problem, I think the answer is yes. The most winning list in Japan right now, post EB, adapted meta-wise, but didn't play any new cards. And it was pretty much an egregious amalgamation of like other cards to like counter blue-green, but I don't think it's gonna stick and do well. But let's talk about them. Law is probably one of the top ones that people want hit, and I agree, this card is way too powerful. It recycles Sengoku, recycles Perona, and returns a lot of blockers that are just overall extremely problematic. But it doesn't solve the issue of these other 3 cards that just break almost every other matchup. Pudding should be banned because the card's just generically too broken, both for Reiju and Dofy and Boa. The card is just too powerful and shouldn't exist in One Piece. That's just my opinion. It's not a skill issue, for the record. This isn't a skillful card. You having to play around your opponent having this in hand isn't skillful. It's not. It just says that you have to play worse than you normally would because pudding exists. In the Australia finals of the Blue Dofy mirror, Jasper had like 13 cards in his hand, and his opponent literally just couldn't draw pudding. And he probably would have lost if he had drawn pudding. But that's the problem with this deck. You shouldn't be able to beat decks that can get 13 cards. Like take Whitebeard. Whitebeard actually might be somewhat good into Dofi if pudding didn't exist. Whitebeard would be more viable in general if pudding didn't exist. Perfume from Her. This is less important than any of these other 4 cards of the 5 here, but it still is that card. If you weather the storm, block her up, and get into a winning position, this card invalidates that. It just invalidates it. And that, in my opinion, I think it's a ban-worthy card too. A card to look at. The Gravity Blade, by far. This event should just be banned and they should never make anything like it ever again. Hitting 2 cards is like one thing, but the cost of this card with the power that it has and its trigger is just way too good. And since they're probably not going to ban any of these 3 cards, this brings me to these 2. If you don't ban Dofi, these 2 need banned immediately. Teach is way too good, way too broken with this leader's effect. It turns your entire hand into the leader effect. Like, what do you want? What Swiss Army effect do you want? You want to put the law on top to bound the Sengoku to return their 4 costs and then play Sengoku again? I'm sick of it, bro. Like, if they don't at least ban these 2 cards, Dofi will still be prominent. You can remove this and it is still incredibly broken. Now, they will lose a lot of things with Law and certain matchups will get better. So if you're looking to tame the deck, banning Law at a minimum is necessary, but you should probably ban Teach. If you ban Teach, the deck slows way down. So why is Jinbei not up here? Jinbei's not up here because it supports other decks. And I don't think Boa and like Blue-Green Zoro Sanji should get nerfed simply because Dofi exists. And then I just beg this question, but why ban all these for him when most of these cards are fair in other decks and this is an OP01 leader? Why? Like, just why? You've had your ability to play this leader since OP01 and there was a time when he was good in the early part of the game. Why are we doing this? So I leave that question and pose it to you.
Marshal D Teach. Any hit to this deck to me is pretty wrong. Jesus Burgess, Black Hole are the 2 offenders that people are wanting hit out of the deck. And these are the reasons that people tell me Teach will be tier 0, Black Hole is unfair, Burgess is too hard to move, and it's too powerful, and in OP010 there are no counters to Blackbeard. Let's just start off at the top. The fact that Teach will be tier 0 is a completely unfounded statement. Nobody can know that, and it's just going to be objectively a false statement. You're not going to convince me that Teach will be tier 0 if Doflamingo's banned. For the record, the people who are making the argument for the first and the last are Dofi players most of the time. And they're players that are going to try and tell me that that is why their deck needs to live. Yeah, no. Teach actually has to get tools to adapt to even beat you, and you literally don't have to change to be the best deck for multiple formats in a row. And I just showed you a chart from a tournament that would make it seem as if at least that Dofi is tier 0, that you're playing the tier 0 deck. You're just same people that tell me that Gecko Moria needs to be banned, despite the fact that they have Teach and Jinbei in their deck. So yeah, Black Hole is unfair. Black Hole is not an unfair card. It's a 4/4 removal, so it KOs a 4 cost and it costs 4 Dawn. So if you paid 4, I paid 4, it's 4/4 removal. The most unfair that this card gets is when it's either A, KOing Jack, which is more mild than the second one, and B, when it turns off or KOs a blocker. KOing the blocker is like one thing, but like turning off a higher cost blocker, just removing the blocker when you're at low life and like Burgesses and 10 cost Teaches are on the board. But when you stop and think about it, I paid 4 Dawn to do that to 1 blocker. Perfume for More can just flat out ignore all your blockers and give 2k to the card, and its trigger draws a card, whereas Black Hole's trigger is a little bit lackluster. It's pretty niche in its applications and can come up at pivotal time, but I've yet to like use it and see it be monumental as a trigger. Burgess is too hard to move. Yeah, that's the point of his first line of text effect, so that he doesn't just get KO'd. That's kind of the point. But that he's too powerful, yeah, I can't buy that, man. First off, the statement that he's too hard to move, yes and no. Yellow has Amaru, it has Lucy, and some other dude that has like pistols that KO stages to like rest the 4 or less. It's also going to get X-Drake. Green has a plethora of tools to rest this guy. Blue can flat bottom deck him with several cards. There's so many cards that just get rid of him. Usopp's coming out in 010, and literally the 7-cost Luffy will be able to like attach a Dawn, swing 8 over 6. Most of the time that I go to swing 8 over, it's for 8 over 6. Even if it's 8 over 7, it's still costing valuable cards out of Teach's hand to protect it. OP 010, there are no counters to the deck. Yeah, this is just patently false too. Usopp is a counter to the deck. Rush variants of Shanks are counters to the deck. Decks that go extremely wide. Purple Luffy, for example, is a counter to the deck. I'll just show you the sim matchmaking right here. So these right now are 09 counters. Blue Boa, if Dofi gets banned, will probably surface up as like the de facto blue deck. The reason why she's not being played right now mostly and in the East is because Dofi's just outright better. But the real important one is this Purple Luffy. Purple Luffy is probably the second most popular deck. It's got second place right here on the sim for the rank. And here's the reality. If Dofi gets banned, I definitely see almost every Dofi player and their mother switching over to Purple Luffy and or BY, one of these two. And the reality is that Purple Luffy is very difficult for Teach to beat, even with the new Liberation spell, because 7 is still a higher threshold than 6. So the Liberation spell doesn't really do anything to that. And double 5 is where things get a little bit crazy in terms of Liberation being effective. Now, they can't do the 5-4 line and keep a Dawn back for Giant. That is something that Liberation can get rid of. But then the question is when we're getting to that late game, how many cards does Teach have on the board, and is Liberation even viable by that point? So Purple Luffy can still do a lot of things to Teach. Okay, that is just to show you that there's an example of one counter. Okay, or 2 technically with the Boa as well for Teach. With that, and Usopp and other rush decks, I'm even sure that Calgera can come around now because Dofi isn't here. Yeah, there isn't a real reason to say that there are no counters to Teach.
BY Luffy. We're going to briefly talk about this one. This should probably be banned. In one of finals, even in 010, and with Dofi gone, it only gets stronger because Dofi is right now currently one of the stronger decks into it. It just needs to be played properly. It's terrible to play against. It's basically like playing against Nami in some way. You can never attack the leader. You're playing into his game plan, turning his leader online, and unless you're blue and have pudding in hand, it's like attacking the leader isn't even good. He's just going to take it, and then he's just going to become way too powerful. He's going to grind into these like certain in-game states. He's going to get advantage and draw and all this other stuff. And being 9k with an iron wall of Sabos is just ridiculous. He's hyper consistent with similar problems to Dofi. He has removal. He has extreme consistency. He has Sabo, which is just draw 2, pitch 2, draw 2, pitch 2, draw 2, pitch 2. He's got an event searcher. He's got a 1-drop searcher. And to top it off, he's got Kuzan, right? He has so many ways to get cards in his hand. And then the Luffy sacks a life, draws card, and all this other stuff. He's extremely consistent. He has removal. He can tech basically lots of other cards in. Like if you wanted to, he can play 9-cost Kaido and just have lots of variations of card pool on top of being the best healer in the game and being 9k with unkillable blockers for KO. He's a crutch deck that gatekeeps formats. For the record, if this is a tier 1 deck in 010, that will be basically 4 formats in a row. Post EB would be 5 formats in a row of this leader being tier 1. So that's on the west side, right? Because red, purple, law was banned for us. All of 8, 8.5, 9. I'm not even sure if there really is a 9.5, but 9, 10, and then 10.5 would be post EB2. It's a crutch deck. People will literally play this to try and convince the rest of the world that it's good. And if Dofi does get banned, the only counters to this deck that I'm aware of that really exist would be like Teach, maybe green with Zoro, but it's questionable because now they play Raigo. And again, I'm not sure, but you're definitely, if Dofi's banned, he's losing a competitor. I don't see why this wouldn't be like de facto best deck. I mean, Usopp can grind into him a little bit. I'm hard pressed to think why Teach isn't the only real counter to this, making this a top 2 or 3 deck in the game. And he's extremely hard to counter for most decks. Moria, couldn't make a ban list video without talking about this. Why should he ban clearly broken card that does way too much in Lucci and BY, and it's a crutch boss card for black. Why it should not, it's very fair in most decks outside of BY and Lucci. That's what it should say there. And then Rebecca is the problem in every deck outside of BY, and Usopp doesn't even play it as next best non-Teach black deck. A few things to talk about with this. So Lucci, the 21 Dawn play is broken, but that's broken because of Rebecca. It's not really broken because of Moria. You could solve that by banning Rebecca, and I'm going to talk about why you should ban Rebecca here in a second. In BY, it's broken, but if you ban the leader like I told you, you avoid all of this. I think BY is worthy of being banned because it has been the best deck, arguably, for 3 formats in a row. Or Dofi. They're sharing the same space. BY and Dofi are in a tier of their own right now compared to basically like every other deck in the game. Even even though BY has a harder counter than Dofi does. It doesn't change the fact that like adaptations can still occur for BY. Second reason is we're getting Usopp, and he did play Moria at first, but he's about to become a tier 1 contender, and I promise you, you don't even need Moria to play it. And you basically nerf everyone else by banning him. And yes, he's a crutch boss card, but that doesn't change the fact that Black just has sucky boss cards that aren't like 9-cost Kaido right now. And even then, it sucks compared to Moria. Rebecca, though, she's broken in every deck, enables offense and defense with 8-cost Moria, grabs and plays something, can be extremely busted in Lucci, even with Gecko gone. And I think this is like the biggest part that people don't think about. You can still Rebecca span on Lucci and have 6 Dawn to do with whatever you want. Has 2 higher reach, and what it can grab goes from to 7 costs. So it can grab Jack, it can grab Sengoku out of the trash, and has been in the center of every broken combo since Rebecca Hina Lucci. And with Moria gone, that's basically what we're going to return to. With it gone, 8-cost Moria is fair outside of BY. Like literally, you take this card away from Lucci, and Moria is extremely fair. I think the best Moria deck is probably green black Perona, or maybe black purple Luffy if Rebecca's banned. Just think about that. Usopp is so broken, he won't even need to play Moria. That's where we're going with black decks. I'm not even sure if Kobe's going to be able to play Moria, honestly.
Green purple Luffy. Hitting this deck is something that people are requesting because of its dominance in the East and cards that we have like Gum Giant here in the West right now that can be hit preemptively before this gets here, so it's not too powerful. So this is about as wrong as to me as saying that Teach needs hit. Giant doesn't need hit either. I think that Giant's a fair card for many of these leaders because they're either A, 3 life, B, 4 life, or C, in order to do what their leader effect does, they end up being at 3 life. So like purple Luffy has to take his life constantly, which in his case is a little bit different because he starts out at 5, can be at 5 the entire game, ramp through other options, but then always has that in pocket ramp, which is also like drawing cards, like ramp 1, draw 1 kind of, right? That's kind of like how I view that. Now, that being said, when it comes to Giant though, it's because these decks play at such low life totals that Giant is one of the reasons why I think it's a necessary card. But let's talk about what's fair about Giant. Giant is crew locked, okay? Like if you're not Straw Hat, you can't play the card. It's not like Kaido gets this card and you get to just stall out for eternity and just like trash your opponent's entire life and then beat them down. Additionally, it solves a lot of these decks problems, and I'm just gonna be honest with you, they play a lot of bricks, man. Like they just do. They just wouldn't be good. They just actually wouldn't be good. Like this deck would not be good. Neither would, you know, red purple Luffy. Even black purple has a lot of bricks, and you know, purple Luffy sometimes can brick up as well. And I get that's why also Giant is so powerful, is because you're not getting punished for playing some of these bricks. But Shanks does just fine, and he plays more bricks than they do. And the other thing is that Shanks also has very powerful tools. It's going to get another extremely powerful tool in Divine Departure. And I think that, you know, we can lift up the ceiling a little bit of some of these other low cost events that are played. Black doesn't even have one. And I just think that Giant's fine. I think that Giant is just completely fine doing what it does. It sets them back a turn. And in terms of this deck being the reason that we need to hit Gum Giant, let me say something to this. This deck has an extreme Dawn allocation and resource issue. And Giant, this actually happened in the Japan finals. Giant actually made him lose the game because he was at 7 Dawn and he couldn't play the Secret Rare on the subsequent turn because of Giant activating, and he needed to. He was going to die if he didn't. This happens with Giant all the time, and they can actually just lose because it was activated and they lost too much Dawn. And with this deck, it has a Dawn resource issue that Giant's activation can just flat out throw off their game plan. But to continue on, the deck can actually compete and isn't useless, giving us more options for the meta. And it's not actually useless like EBO1 decks where it's 2 weeks old and some testing isn't even real due to the Rested Dawn bug. The Secret Rare Luffy right now in the sim can use Rested Dawn for its effect, and it's supposed to be sending 2 active Dawn back to restand and take a life. So that's what that is. And then Black and Red Green Smoker destroy the deck. So Red Green Smoker assuredly destroys this deck. The guy who just won the Japanese finals played like 6 of these in his entire tournament and just like destroyed them all. Black is also a severe counter because the Sanji Pudding needs to live not for its effect but for the 7k pressure that it provides. And with that not there, by the way, Going Merry doesn't solve any of these issues. Just to give you an example, if Rob Lucci is playing this and they have have 6 Dawn and 10 cards in their trash, a simple Tempest Kick Leader Swing and Kaku will still kill this card. Jack and Tempest Kick Leader Swing will still kill the Sanji Pudding. In terms of the secret rare, it gets a little bit more difficult, but one reduction, cost reduction, isn't that big of a deal, especially when Gecko Moria's Suru Himepo nonsense is coming to the board and you're just losing everything. So again, not that big a deal. I don't think that people don't really realize how strong black is into this. Like even Teach, right? The Liberation spell that kills 2 cards at the same time, it looks at original cost. So the Sanji Pudding can still die to it. And to top it off, the Zoro also can die to it at the same time. So you can still pop 2 cards potentially. Teach has no problem reducing like with a stronger than Shiganing a card off the board or getting rid of it. So all that to say, there's counters to this deck too. And I think that when it comes to this, any hits to this would be extremely premature and not warranted. This deck feels like Shanks in that there are a lot of early wins with it, but it'll probably peter off. The format will readjust and then probably go back to Dofi if it doesn't get hit.
Unbans, Sokka. I'm going to make a couple arguments for this. So it's an extremely skillful deck that will also have extreme counters. So it's good and countered by Teach. So Teach turns off the on plays of the leader and what it wants to do, which is the majority of the deck. And then Howlin' Blaze dunks on Burgess. So it's like kind of like this to and fro thing. It offers competitive options that just get steamrolled by good decks now. There are lots of good decks that would probably take Sakazuki out back. I'm like not even trolling with that comment. It's not like Sokka back then in 06 for its time was obviously de facto best deck. But I mean like even right now, Rob Lucci would have something to say to this guy about being the best removal leader. He's a 4 life leader, he's a 5. He gets the same amount of removal, he contributes to the trash twice as fast every turn, and simultaneously has a much deeper and more broken card pool. Like if Gecko and Rebecca are not banned, which I don't think that either of those cards really are, my argument is that at least Rebecca should be. He is way better at playing Gecko than Sakazuki is. Now Sakazuki is going to get to consistently place those cards in the trash, but the things that Lucci's going to get to do that he can't is way bigger, and it's a much bigger deal. It's still a skill ceiling. The ceiling of the deck in general and the skill ceiling of Lucci, skill ceiling is probably a little bit lower than Sokka, but the overall ceiling of what the deck can do for Lucci is much higher than Sokka. So that's just like removal, right? Shanks would dunk all over this deck. You're gonna tell me that you have a 4 life leader. Shanks already tears 4 life leaders apart, but defensively, there isn't anything that's good that this deck can play. That it usually would. Like you'd probably play the Navy package, which means your best blocker is probably Borsellino, but all of your cards get trashed by, like literally all of them get trashed by Ben Beckman. The attack ceiling on this deck, it was like constantly. Before Moria came out, it was constantly 6. Now it's 9. But guess what? Moria isn't even that dangerous to Shanks, because they could just tech and 10 cost Shanks and remove it, or some other form of removal with reduction. Then Ben Beckman dunks the rest of the deck. Just dunks the rest of it. Yellow didn't have Raigo back then, so 10 cost Kaido is a lot worse. Blue's actually playing Red Rock in some spaces for the Teach. He would actually just get murdered by Usopp. Usopp would just destroy him. He would not be playable into Usopp whatsoever. Usopp is getting to hard plus draw once per turn for all of his cards getting removed, period. Just imagine you're reducing cards, which already Usopp's leader counters what this leader is trying to do. That's just at base, and he's drawing cards for it. While Rebecca's spamming out way more broken cards, that his control with the 7 cost Luffy and all these other things is going to just tax your hand, starve you out, and you're just going to die. He will be power crept by future leaders pretty hard. This leader would get smoked by Kobe. Completely smoked by Kobe. But it still probably won't come back, but I think it would be interesting to let him off the list. It would give us another option, and with Dofi banned, maybe we could have like a little bit more of a thing. Also, if Dofi doesn't get banned, please just bring this back so we can have another option to dunk on their whole board. Like, please. Please, Bandai, please. But it still probably won't come back. But I think it would be interesting. Great Eruption. I think this card actually will come back, oddly. One, it supports Kobe. The issues with it and why it could stay banned, though, is it supports Teach extremely heavily. They'll play this over other reduction because, like Laboon, for example, because it's a hard draw and it's minus, which is like really good. Its trigger is not bad either. But simultaneously, replacing the card in reduction is like one of the biggest issues. So if you think this card is bad in Teach, then you think Stronger's effect is bad. Stronger is a 2K, and I'll argue that, but sometimes Stronger is the difference in a lot of removing of cards, and this card replaces itself in a 1-for-1, whereas Stronger is still a straight -1 because it requires you to discard another card on top of drawing the card. This would obviously be good in Teach. And then this supports Lucci heavily. I mean, they would play this and Tempest Kick alongside each other and Ice Age in some combination. And obviously Lucci getting to draw more cards is just really good. And it supports Moria heavily, you bring it back, but I don't think anyone's going to complain if Gecko Moria somehow makes a comeback. You can actually see this coming back to help promote Kobe and aid in black removal in the game because it kind of needs it. And this will also insist in making green-purple Luffy weaker. It'll give black more of a chance to stand up, giving that auto -2 reduction to the Sanji pudding with Shigan on top of it or some other thing. It would also help a Smoker, right? So I think that this could actually come back. I don't think it's that busted of a card that it needs to stay banned anymore, especially with like Tempest Kick. Like Tempest Kick is basically the same thing pretty much. Like we're not really using Tempest Kick until we get to 10 cards anyway. And this is like a weaker version of it basically at that point. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. We want you to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Hit that notification bell to get notified of more videos when they drop. And let me know what you guys think about this video and what you want banned. Look forward to the discussion down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. It's Marcus with TCG Discussion signing off. Laters.